Well, good morning. It's good to see everybody. It's good to be here. And I don't know if we got one out here or not, but this morning when I woke up, we're in that stage of time now when you wake up in the dark. And I don't do well, Coleman. I'm just not a wake up in the dark kind of guy. I wake up when the sun comes up, and so I'm kind of moving around slow these days. But man, it was raining so heavy at home. It just came just an absolute downpour this morning. So I just stayed in there just a little bit longer, and it was nice. It was nice. I love this time of year. I love the fall. I hope you guys are enjoying that. I hope you're getting motivated to participate in all the different things that we have going on. Going to be a lot of activities this week. Don't forget about this Samaritan's Purse ministry. This is a fantastic ministry for our church to outreach around the world, and so be sure and pick up a shoebox if you haven't already done that. And the instructions are inside to participate in our Trunks of Treats this week on Wednesday. That's going to be a great time for our church and for our kids, and so looking forward to seeing everybody participate in all those neat things. And so when I think about that, I think about what motivates us and why we do the things we do. And when we were reading this week and going through our Bible plan, as Steve said, is the Church of Corinth was something. And Paul, one thing that I really like about Paul, one thing that I really enjoyed this week is that it kind of gives us a picture into that mentality of the people in that community and in that city and in that place, and what kind of drove them. And Paul understood very clearly what drove them and what they were involved in and the things that were going on around them and in their culture. And you have to kind of pick that apart just a little bit to be able to really get the full context of what today's lesson is about and what our passage is about. And at the end of the day, I think we're all challenged. I know as I went through this week and began to think about why we do the things we do and how we plan things out and what our goals are and where we're trying to achieve, it really challenged me. And so I'm just gonna be honest with you on that when we come to this. And I think it would be kind of sad if it never challenged me too. But it did, and very, very significantly. And so we're going to kind of dive into that as we go through. And so one of the things that we find as we look at the church at Corinth and how Paul was approaching this, there's some real parallels with the church at Corinth and our own timeline. And so there's a lot of things that all we have to do is understand what he's talking about, and then we can begin to put that into context. And what was happening is that people weren't as zealous about taking the gospel to the lost. And it wasn't happening the way it should happen. And so this is really what we're going to look at today is kind of a pep talk from Paul. And we can take this same passage and we can apply it to our church here. We can apply it to the church today. We can apply it to our own lives in a very, very significant way. And two things that we want to consider at the outset before we look at the passage is eternity is at stake. And we should never forget that. Sometimes we get caught up in our lives, and we get caught up in tomorrow, and we get caught up in what we're doing right here, and we fail. We tend to take our focus away from eternity, and we should never do that. That is what the Christian life is about, and there's much more of that than there is here, and that's a perspective that God usually takes our whole lives to help us to finally understand. And the quicker that we get on board with that, I really believe, the more effective they really become. And the second thing that we want to focus on today, and something that we don't talk a whole lot about, I think the reason that we don't talk a whole lot about it is because we don't understand it fully. And that is the rewards that we obtain in doing the work of the Lord. Because those awards and those rewards, those things that we secure are not earthly. They're not of this world. And because they're not right now, because they're not, we can't hold them in our hands today and we can't see them, and even more so, we don't really even know what they are, it becomes hard to focus on that. And what happens to us is we tend to focus on something that is far, far, far less worthy. So let's turn the pages of our Bible. This week we're focusing in on 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And we're going to drill down into verses 24 and 25 is where we're going to be camped at today. And so here's a passage that Paul gives to the church at Corinth to really appeal to who they are and what's really kind of in their heads. And this is what he says: "Do you not know that in a race, all runners run, but only one gets the prize. Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Now, what we're going to talk about today, the beginning and the first point that we're going to look at, is how we live our lives with the mindset of an athlete. And this is something that's a little foreign to me because I'm not an athlete. Okay, this never was my thing. I didn't play sports and I didn't do those things, so I didn't go through that kind of training and I didn't go through those kinds of things. But I enjoy sports. I love to watch sports, and so I'm a big football fan and I'm a baseball fan and go Braves last night, Coleman. Okay, a little something. All right. Because I'm actually a Yankees fan, and they got beaten, so then the Dodgers, and you go with Yankees, Dodgers, and there it is. So you see, there's a lot of sports in my history. I love watching sports, and I remember, all the way back, and I think the reason that I like the Yankees is because it goes back to Reggie Jackson in the 70s when I first really had enough to sit down and actually watch a whole baseball game. Was probably the Dodgers-Yankees series back in the 70s, and so that's the 1970s for those of you that are wondering. But here's the thing. The first thing that we know about an athlete is they are wired to win, okay? A person who is an athlete is wired to win, and so when that's the way they approach the game, that's the way they approach what they're doing, and so when the better athlete that they are, the more wired that they are to win. Losing is just not an option, and it's really tough. Okay, it's really tough working with athletes, and I have a lot of students that are athletes, and this week I have several of the girls that are on the Lady Eagles soccer team, and I've had to spend a lot of time talking to them, all the excitement building up, and then the loss Thursday night was really tough, and so working with them and helping them to understand that has been really a lot going on this week. So it's really interesting that God brought us to this place. Well, this is what you need to know about Corinth. It really wasn't the Olympic Games that were so important to the Corinthians and to the people who lived in that area, but it was another game called the Isthmian Games. And the Isthmian Games gets its name from the isthmus where Corinth was located. But the Isthmian Games were the games that they all participated in. And so when Paul would talk about this, the runners running in the race, this was something that would really perk up their ears because they were all involved in this, and they were very, very focused on this, and this is something that they really, really cared a lot about. And so whenever he would speak to them in these contexts, then they would be like, oh, okay, so what are you talking about here? And so there were things that you had to do in order to participate in the Isthmian Games. And I think one, you had to be Greek, you had to be of a certain thing. But the last thing, the most important is you had to dedicate yourself to training for, I think it was 10 months. You would have to do significant training to be able to participate in the games. And so you had to practice and practice and practice. And so you would run and you would run and you would run and you would run. They had different events that they would compete in and these different things. And so in order to participate in the Isthmian Games, you would have to dedicate yourself to this. And you would have to run in such a way as to win the race. You couldn't just say, well, I'm going to do this over here and then I'm going to show up and I'm just going to run the race. That was not acceptable. You had to be able to document that you had spent, a significant amount of time. People had to see you training for the games, or you couldn't participate in the games. There had to be a significant amount of time spent involved in putting yourself into this thing. And here's the thing: when I think about that, that's very, very tied into the culture that we are living in today. For those of you who have kids, you have young people, then you really see what we're talking about. And so if you're the parent of an athlete, or you are an athlete or have been an athlete, you understand what I'm talking about, is that they will tell you that commitment is what it takes to make you successful. Okay, and I've seen this, I've seen this in my own lifespan. Just looking back, we used to see guys go out for the basketball team in October. It's like in October, it's like if you want a basketball tryouts or whatever, and that's the only time that you ever saw balls bouncing and people really participating in basketball. And now it's not like that anymore, is it? It's like, if you're going to be on the basketball team, then we need you to dedicate to the basketball team, and then you're going to get on travel teams, and then you're going to practice all year round, and we're going to have open gym, and you're just going to dedicate yourself to this sport so that you can be successful. And so we've seen it in the span of time that I've been living. We've seen significant amounts of time dedicated to being successful. I asked one of the young ladies on the soccer team. She came and we were talking Friday after the game the next day, And I looked at her and I said, how long have you played soccer? She said, since I was 3. I said, you don't remember not playing soccer, do you? She said, nope. I don't have memories beyond not playing soccer. It's always been part of my life. It's always been what I did. And so we wire that into our kids, and we do this. And so it takes that kind of commitment in where we're at to be successful. And so Paul saw that in Corinth. He saw the same kind of dedication to these games. Just the same way that we do all of our different sports. We do soccer and basketball and football and all these different things. I mean, we've had to legislate in the Kentucky Athletic Association, high school athletic, a dead period in the middle of summer just so families could go on vacation. You all know this. 2 weeks out of the summer is called dead period. If you didn't know this, and then you're learning, okay? But we do that. I mean, it says that for 2 weeks of the summer, they say you can't practice or participate so that you can actually just take some time off and breathe, okay? And you know what people do? They leave the state of Kentucky and they go somewhere else so they can practice, all right? That happens. It happens. They don't take those 2 weeks off because they're like, if I can practice those 2 weeks, I can get an edge on the ones who do. And so that's kind of where we are in our culture. I see it happen all the time. I see it takes place. So here's the thing. What did you get? And this is Paul's looking at the culture. He's looking at these games. He's looking at Corinth. And what did you get if you won the Isthmian Games? Okay? Are you ready for this? A crown of celery. Okay? I read that. I looked at it. I said, I got to look this up. And so I looked it up, and it was like, okay. And somebody must have really laughed like Steve did about getting a crown of celery, so they changed it later to pine straw. Laugh again, okay? So that's what they got. They got a crown of celery or a crown of pine straw for winning those games. And so I believe that Paul understands that we're kind of wired with a competitive nature. We're just wired for a competitive, and you do this. I can take our FFA students, and we can come up with a game, and we can play the game, and you know, they'll just go, you know, we're wired that way. Okay, we're wired that way. We're wired to win, and we're wired competitively, and so that's not a bad thing because that's how God made us, right? And so it's not hard to get a group of teenagers to get them. We drove all over 3 counties last week looking for a pumpkin. Okay, and what was that, right? You know, and when you get competitive and you start running, I even ran last week, okay? My watch was like, hey, you know, what are you doing? And so we're looking for this thing. And so it's how we're wired and it's how we're dialed in. And so Paul's appealing to this competitive nature. He compares the crown that they are running for that will not last to the crown that will last forever. Now, we have to understand the kind of race that we're running as Christians. We're not in competition with one another, okay? Churches are not in competition with each other. We're not running against each other. We are running our race against the obstacles of the world. Okay, we have an enemy that we have to run against. We have the world. We have all these things that we're running against. We're running against the obstacles of the world as Christians, and we're not running against each other. So then Paul gives them the way that we are to run the race. And the first thing that we have to look at, we're going to look at another passage here in just a moment, but in order to be effective at running our race in life, we have to get rid of the things that hinder us. And we're going to go back and look at 25 again here, 1 Corinthians 9:25. He says, everybody who competes in the games goes into strict training. Okay? And if you look at some different versions here, it'll talk about self-control, and it's no wonder that self-control is a fruit of the Spirit because it requires discipline in order to be able to train. All right? It requires discipline in order to be able to train. You have to be dedicated to it. If you're going to train to do something, then you can't just say, well, I'm going to run today, but I'm not going to run for the next 3 weeks. It doesn't work that way. You've got to do it every day. You have to do something to get yourself prepared for that. The writer of Hebrews also addresses this, and I've always looked at this passage in a variety of ways, and I camped out here for just a little bit this week. And so let's take a look at Hebrews 12:1, where it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. And so I begin to wonder now if the author of Hebrews here was not influenced by this same mindset of this same culture. But here's the thing that we ask our question, is what hinders our walk with Christ? Sin. Sin is what hinders our walk with Christ. And so we have to ask ourselves the question as we look at how we navigate our own race in life, as we look at how we navigate, we have to ask ourselves, is there something that has entangled us? Is there something that has entangled you? You see, the sin easily ensnares us, is what it says. And so we have to get rid of that hinders us to be able to walk and to be able to run in the race. So you have to evaluate that for yourself. You know that. You know the answer to that question. Have you become entangled in something that drags you down? Here's a question about, and this is where Paul was trying to get to, is that they weren't being very competitive in getting out there and informing their neighbors and the people that were around them about the gospel. And so we take that and apply that to us. And let me ask you this question. If you pull out of your driveway or wherever you live and go left or right, the first 5 houses that you come to, do you know them? It's a question. I can't answer it for you, but you can. You pull out of your driveway, you go left, you go right. The first 5 people that live in your vicinity, for me, it would be a few miles, okay, to get that far. But in one direction, it would be a little bit. But for some of you, it's like boom, 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 boom. Okay, do you know them? Do you know your neighbors? Because here's the thing about this that we want to look at, and here's the thing about this. It doesn't work this way. Okay, when we're talking about the race of life and sharing the gospel and getting out there and being this is it doesn't. We don't just want to walk up to the door, knock on the door, and say, "Hey, if you're not saved, you're going to hell. Thanks for stopping in." Okay, all right. That's not it. You need to know your neighbors, okay? Because here's the thing. If you know your neighbors and your neighbors know you, whether they're lost or whether they're saved or whether they're church people or not church people, it doesn't matter. If you know your neighbors and your neighbors know you, and you make plenty of opportunity, eventually, if they're lost, they're going to ask a question. You're going to have an opportunity for a conversation. And that's the way it's supposed to work, folks. That's the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to have relationships with those whom we are around in our world. And so we have to be able to people should be drawn to us. When you give God that opportunity, He can work in that opportunity. But you have to go out and meet, and you have to go out and know. You can't live one life here and another life out there. It can't work that way. It won't work that way. It won't. So the first thing we have to do is discard what hinders us. And the second thing is we have to discipline our bodies. Now, Paul is talking to them about the games, and he's helping them to understand what this means. And so we understand what it means to train the physical body. Okay? We understand what that requires. We understand what that does. We understand what that means. They understood what that meant. But I think what Paul is trying to get to here is to help them to understand those who are out of shape, not physically, but spiritually. You see, we have to train our spiritual bodies because it's easy to get out of shape spiritually. How do you train your spiritual body? That's what we're doing this year. That's why we're doing it. When you begin to read the Bible every day, when you begin to spend intentional time in prayer every day, when you make that a priority in your life, when it's a priority in your life to spend time in the Word and time in prayer, those two things work together to train our spiritual body. It always comes back to basics. Prayer is like a treadmill for the soul. Okay? Prayer is like a treadmill for the soul. And reading and memorizing Scripture, what we're doing and what we're focusing on this year is training and practice for our spiritual bodies. And what Paul is looking at here, and what he's appealing to them, is he's like, look at how we train our physical bodies for a race. Look at how the time that we put into to train all of these things. And Paul is appealing to them going, and you're doing all of this, and you're spending all of these hours for celery, for pine straw. Think about that for just a moment. How much time do we spend doing things that we earn a trophy? Okay, in our world we don't weave pine straw together, but we have these trophies. I spent the first 4 or 5 years of my teaching career boxing up and getting rid of band trophies from the high school because they had just abandoned them. There was a whole room. There was one whole storage room at the high school that was completely filled with all of the trophies that had been won through the 70s and the 80s at the high school. And it's like, where do you put them? And they're collecting dust. And you know, Dr. Dobson always told this story about he was a tennis player in college, and he was always so proud of his accomplishments, and he worked really hard and all these things, and so he had this trophy, and it was displayed there. The tournament that he won was displayed in the hall and everything. And later, as times changed, somebody found that trophy in a dumpster, and they brought it back to him. And one of the things I'll never forget when he taught on this is he said that given long enough, life will trash your trophies. Life will trash what's just so important to you. Okay? What's so important to you. 3 generations from now, nobody will care. And so we give it long enough, life will trash our trophies. And so Paul is saying, look, what are you spending so much time on? And so, and this is the point that he makes, is how much more as born-again believers with the promise of heaven and the promise of eternity, how much harder should we run for God? The response to that should be, well, we should be all in. But I do want to caution you to not get discipline confused with legalism. You see, the idea of legalism, and this rears its head up everywhere, even in Baptist churches, is the idea of legalism is that if we check all the boxes, okay? If we check all the boxes, well, I'm there every time the doors are open, checking boxes, okay? Or, you know, I've done all of these things, we're checking boxes, see? And so the legalist will try to check all of the boxes, and so the concept there is, and it's a wrong concept, but the concept is if I can do enough, then I can somehow earn something from God. Okay, so here's the difference. Here's the contrast. Here's the difference in legalism and discipline. Discipline, on the other hand, is shaping yourself to be able to best serve Christ. Okay? Discipline is shaping yourself to be able to best serve Christ. You see, you ever thought about, some people don't like the term discipline. Okay? It's like you need to be more disciplined. You need to do this. And it's like, wait a minute, what are we supposed to make disciples? Discipline. Oh, wow, that's where the word comes from, isn't it? You see? It's spiritual discipline is what makes me want to do. And here's the thing. Discipline shapes ourselves to be able to best serve Christ. And so this is a way that we look at it. Legalism is duty. Okay? Discipline is devotion. You see the difference? Legalism is, I do that, I got to go. I got to be there. I got to do this. Why? Out of duty. Discipline is because I want to. Okay? It's rooted in love. Discipline is rooted in love for Him. And this is where the discipline is devotion, and this is the difference. Legalism says, I earn something, I give something, I get something. Discipline says, I already have it. I already have it. He's already given it to me. I can't earn it. I can't lose it. My response then is out of love. My response is an outflow of devotion to the one who saved me. A theologian, Dallas Willard, as a Christian scholar, he says this. I like this quote. He says, grace is against earning. It's never against effort. It's never against effort. Don't let the idea of God is going to save who He wants and it doesn't matter take away from our efforts. Okay? That is never the case. We are to go. Okay? We are called to go and make and not sit and wait. We're called to go and make and not sit and wait. What activities are you involved in that put you in contact with non-Christians or unchurched people? You ever thought about that? What things do you intentionally do that put you in contact with non-church people? Because this is what happens. As we grow older and as we do things, our circles tend to shrink. Okay, our circles tend to shrink, and then all of a sudden you're only hanging out with saved people. Okay, you're only hanging around with other church people, and then so who are you sharing the gospel with? all right? Because they all know it. And so then you have to be intentional, and you have to think, well, what in the world can I do in order to be connected to the world? You see, people's lives will always fall apart. I mean, you can find somebody and it's like, well, everything's smooth and it's great. Okay, well, it'll happen. That's just the way life is. Life is up and down. Life is in and out. Life goes up and down. It's a roller coaster ride. And so people's lives will fall apart. And when they do, they always look to turn to somebody. You should live your life in such a way that they turn to you. Live your life in such a way that they turn to you. So we live our life with this mindset, and this mindset of an athlete. And Paul says to look toward the prize of an athlete. And so I just want to go back and look at this again. I want to talk about these crowns in verse 25. We'll look at 24 and 25 just to kind of bring this into focus. He says, run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown. Okay? The crown that will not last. Remember, the crown of celery. And then he says, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. So let's look at that in this context. You have two Greek words here that translates to crown. There's not an actual word that transliterates into that. And so there's two words that are used. One is Stephanos and one is diadem. Okay? And you may be familiar with diadem. But let's understand. So Paul is talking to them and using these terms, and they understand this. And so this is how this worked out. In the Isthmian Games, athletes would complete in multiple games. There would be multiple sport, okay? And so they would run this race, and kind of like how we do now. We have this relay or this 400 meter or whatever it is. And so they run in multiple games. And if they won that game, they would receive a diadem. Okay, and the diadem that they would receive was like a cloth. It was a colored cloth that they would tie around their head. And so they would continue to put these around their head. And at the conclusion of the games, they would take all of their diadems and they would lay them all out to see how many they had. And the one who had the most diadem would receive the Stephanos. They would receive the crown of celery or pine straw. Okay, and so this is how this all unfolded. And so Paul is saying, look, you'll work this hard for a crown of celery and pine straw. How much harder should we strive for the rewards that await us in eternity? If these people are running this hard for something that's going to fade away, how much harder should the Christian run for something that's going to last forever? And so we don't live our lives in that context. We fail at this so bad. Randy Alcorn's a former pastor, seminary professor out in the Northwest, and this is something that I thought was interesting. He said, business people work in a world of incentives, and so do homemakers, school children, and every other human being regardless of age, nationality, or wealth. Every effective manager, every qualified leader knows the importance of incentives. Unfortunately, too many Christians consider incentives to be secular or unspiritual. Most of us use rewards to motivate our children, so why are we surprised that God uses rewards to motivate us? My first year teaching, I was at Logan County High School. I had a guest speaker. He came every year. They just told me he was already on the calendar, and so he came from the Division of Forestry. He came in to one of my freshman classes, and he started talking to them about trees. And he wasn't the most motivational, inspirational speaker that I've ever had. And my kids were starting to get a little bit restless. And I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, they're not paying attention to him. I'm going to ream them out when he leaves. And so I'm getting angrier by the moment as we go through this presentation. And then he gets to the end of his presentation. He goes, okay, now we're going to have a little fun. And he reaches in his basket and in his bag, and he pulls out a bag of candy. He says, okay, I'm going to ask you all some questions about what I've talked about today, and if you can answer the questions, you get candy. They're answering questions like fire, and I'm like, how did you all know the answers to these questions? How did you weren't listening? And then when they got done, the bell rang and they left, and I looked at him and he said, yeah, you always think they're not listening until you get the candy bag out, and then you realize they're really paying attention. We're wired that way, okay? We're wired that way. We work for incentives. We work for things to do. And this is the thing. Jesus promised this. We don't spend a whole lot of time on this. Look at this. Matthew chapter 16:27 says this. For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, And then He will reward each person according to what they have done. I don't know what all that means. I really don't. But it is. And it lasts forever. You see, what tangible things are you doing that makes deposits in eternity? Think about that. We do all kinds of things that deposit for here. But what do we do that makes tangible deposits in eternity? See, setting aside time to disciple your kids, taking time for that mission trip, taking time to make something like the Samaritan's Purse ministry a focus of your family, giving to the Lord financially. It's not about the amount, it's about the discipline of giving. We give God our time, we give Him our talent, we give Him our treasures, and He honors all of it. All of it. And you may look at athletes or athletics like I do sometimes and think, well, I ain't doing it. I'm not going to work that hard for a crown of celery or pine straw. I'm just not doing it. We do it all the time, folks. They're called paychecks and material possessions. We do it all the time. We run for fame. We run for the next vehicle, for the next big game. And all of it fades away. All of it fades away. Only three things are eternal: God, His Word, and the souls of men and women. Francis Chan uses this illustration with a rope. I wanted to get a longer rope, but wouldn't fit in my cargo pants, so that's what we got. But if you imagine this rope is your whole life, and imagine this part is what you spend on this earth. Okay? How much time do we spend preparing for about that much of it? That's probably our retirement on this earth. This represents eternity. You see how it works? And we're all guilty. We're all guilty. We're all guilty for running for prizes and things that are going to fade away, things that are not going to last beyond this life. We spend most of our lives preparing for a small portion of our lives and not in preparing for eternity. It happens to us all the time. So my question as we close this is this: how are you preparing? How are you preparing? What are you investing in eternity? You know, one of the questions that I struggled with back in 1997 is I had already started my teaching career. And when the Lord made it clear to me that I was supposed to pastor, I was like, maybe I need to wait until I finish the teaching career, and then I can start. That thought didn't last too long, and I'm so glad it didn't. Because I think about the interactions that I have with my students and how many of my students I'm still connected with. And I think about how God has used that to just kind of intertwine the ministry that He's given me. And it would have been so wrong to have waited. It would have been so wrong to have waited. I'm so glad I didn't wait. Listen, I want you to live your life in such a way that you don't wait either. Whatever He's calling you to do, run in a way as to get the prize. But it's not a prize that's going to go away. It's not something that's going to sit on a shelf and collect dust. It's a prize that's going to last and last and last. Let me pray for you. Father, we come before you this morning and we thank you. We thank you for how you've wired us. We thank you for how you have designed us to be competitive, to just go and to just run. And Lord, it's so easy to get caught up into life. We just go in such a way as to we begin to put all of our emphasis into just a small portion and things that are going to pass away, things that are going to be just dissolved. Father, we should run in such a way as to win the rewards that you have awaiting us. Father, we can't know what they are. They're too amazing for us to be able to comprehend. And Lord, I just pray today that you You just touch our hearts. Draw us, Father, to you. Father, some of us need to make some decisions. Some of us need to respond in different ways. Father, maybe some of us have sin that's entangling us and ensnaring us and keeping us from running effectively. We just need to get rid of that. We need to repent of it. Turn. Father, some of us are just running for celery and straw. Father, as we begin to realize the emphasis that we put in our life, Father, help us to make more time for family. Help us to make more time for spiritual discipline. More time for you, more time in prayer, more time in your word. Father, you can lead us and guide us to do these things. And Father, as Paul was appealing to the Corinthian church to get out and do more and to reach their community and become involved in their community and become involved with people who are lost, help us to do the same. Help us to respond to the same pep talk the way the Corinthian church did. And Father, we pray now that you just guide us in that way. You know how we need to respond. You know what we need to do. So you just call us to that effect, Father. Help us respond in the way you call us. We ask it in Jesus' name.